Okay, Patrick, very well done. Steve, thanks for moderating. A lot of valuable information shared there. Now we're on to our second speaker, who's going to be our morning keynote speaker. I'd like to introduce you to Kris Hinson. Kris is currently the Vice President of Corporate Finance and Treasurer of Crown Castle, the largest provider of shared telecommunications infrastructure in the United States. In his current role, Kris leads investor relations, treasury, and corporate financial planning and analysis at Crown. Prior to joining Crown, Kris held senior finance and management roles at ExxonMobil, one of the largest publicly traded international energy and petrochemical companies in the world. Kris earned an MBA from Harvard Business School and an AB in economics from Harvard University. So let us give a warm welcome to Kris Hinson.
Thanks a lot. Good to meet you too. You bet.
I'm a father. I have 2 children. And so the ability to know that I can pick up the phone at any point in time and reach them is a reassuring thing for me.
And there's nothing like talking to someone in person, one-on-one, but we can't always do that. And in this world where everything's moving so quickly, we want to be able to connect to people all the time.
Mobile technology is hugely important to what I do every day, from my parenting and into my business. I map where I'm going, I meet clients at houses, unlock doors, answer questions.
When we utilize technology, it allows things to run much better, more efficiently, and makes life easier for everyone.
The more infrastructure that we get in terms of ability to connect improves life for everyone. It's an essential part of any community that seeks to grow.
For a community or a business to function without having that connectivity, it hinders your ability to think progressively. It hinders your ability to gain information. It stops progress. Technology is truly tied to opportunity.
Whether I'm at meetings or traveling for work, technology connects me to what I want to do and with whom I need to do it.
Technology means opportunity to me, not only for businesses, but for people. Different kinds of opportunities, different ways to connect with people all around the world.
I don't know that I could have ever dreamed where technology has brought us, and I honestly don't know that I can envision the future. I think it's limitless.
Well, first, thank you for having me. It's nice to be here. When I watch this video, it's interesting because it makes me think a little bit about my own experience with this industry. And I will tell you in a second, I haven't been at Crown Castle long. I spent a lot of time in the energy space. But I remember very vividly the first time I went to buy a cell phone. I was a sophomore in college, and I walked into a Sprint store, came out with a Motorola flip phone, and I think I had like 300 anytime minutes, something like that. And I thought it was the coolest thing because until that point, I had a calling card that I would take and I would walk. I actually had to go to another building and find a payphone that was open and then try to get a hold of my parents who were quite a ways away. I grew up in South Central Kansas, and they had to actually be sitting by the phone in order for me to get a hold of them. And it was just this really long, torturous process. It wasn't very successful. It took a lot of time. And so I remember getting that and being like, this is so great. And I ended up spending a lot less time walking back and forth between buildings in the rain. And then I remember the next phone I got, and it was a blocky thing, and it didn't flip, but I could read the news on it. And I remember sitting on a bus the first time that I had a chance to actually look at the news on my phone, and I would pull up a site, and it would just chug along, like chug, 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 chug. And about 10, 20 seconds later, about 40 new words would come up, but I could actually look at the internet on my phone. And today, I have an iPhone. I can do do anything with it. I can tell you what the tire pressure is on all 4 tires of my car sitting 600 miles away right now. I don't know why I would need to do that, but I could if I wanted to. But it also helps connect. So I have 2 brothers that live in Europe. I could call both of them, get them both on the phone right now, see their faces while I talk to them, and I don't even have to use a calling card to do it, which is nice. So it's pretty amazing to think about how far things have come over the last 20 years and how much, at the end of the day, it impacts the way that we live, the way that we connect. It makes us more efficient. It provides entertainment, new forms of leisure. But at the end of the day, what I'm going to talk about is how much it actually, what we do, provides the backbone for all sorts of technological advancements that I would imagine 20 years from now. I know I certainly wouldn't do a very good job of predicting where things would go, but the work that is done here is very much critically important. A little bit about my background. I know I got a bit of an intro, which was very nice. I do work at Crown Castle. I would imagine most people are familiar with Crown Castle, but in case you are not, I put this map up just with a portfolio of our assets. We have sort of three main businesses under 2 segments. We own 40,000 towers in the U.S. and Puerto Rico. That makes up about 70% of our revenue. We own 90,000 route miles of fiber. That makes up about, call it 20% of the revenue, these big round numbers. And we also have 115,000 small cells on air or under contract in our backlog. Right now, small cells makes up about 10% or so of our business. That is also the fastest growing part of the business, though. If you look at 2024, what we would expect, we have a tower organic growth in the 4.5% range, fiber at 3%, but small cells growing at about 14%. So even though it's small now, certainly have seen acceleration on that side more recently. So I mentioned that I've just recently come to Crown. I've actually been there 9 months. Before that, I worked at ExxonMobil, so I'm relatively new to the space. I probably have a lot more to learn today on the wireless industry than I will share, but I thought rather than get up and pretend to talk about a bunch of things that I probably know less about than many of you, I thought it might be interesting to provide a little different perspective and look at the industry, and particularly kind of where we are currently and where it might go through the lens of an outsider. So I spent almost 15 years working in primarily oil and gas. I also spent a little bit of time working in chemicals as well while I was at ExxonMobil. But the first thing and the most striking thing coming into this industry is really this chart. So there are a lot of corollaries between energy and telecommunications infrastructure, actually. They're both very capital intensive. You have to plan over a very, very long period of time, or you end up effectively, behind. In energy, if you don't invest, wells deplete over time. If you don't spend more money, what you are producing today will be about 5% less tomorrow. Just pressure goes down, resources get depleted, so you continue to have to invest. And in fact, the industry invests hundreds of billions of dollars every year just to maintain roughly flat production. And if you look at this chart, in the United States, you can barely see, I put automobiles on here as well. This was the other industry that I've worked in. A very, very long time ago, I worked at the Ford Motor Company. And from the time I started working until now, the markets in the U.S. for both of those industries are essentially flat. They're up a little, 7 and 8%. That just goes back to 2011. My work history started, still quite a ways farther to the left there. And if you go back farther, it doesn't really matter. In the United States, there have been somewhere between 13 and 17 million car and light trucks sold every year over this time frame. In terms of energy demand in the United States, it stayed relatively flat. This is crude and products, but there's not a lot of growth. If you look in emerging markets and other places outside of the United States, you would have seen more growth, but in the U.S., not so much. Mobile data, on the other hand, is up pretty significantly, and I think the chart doesn't really even do it justice. But you have here, it's up 11,000%, give or take, over this time frame. That's extremely significant, and what it does effectively is it provides a really nice tailwind to everything that we do. So I spent 3 years in investor relations at ExxonMobil from 2020 through 2022. I was there, I arrived at the very start of the pandemic. Energy demand fell, call it like globally 10% or so on the oil side. Prices don't move though when that happens, and so there was a huge shock. Oil actually traded in negative price points in certain places for a while. There was a point where WTI traded at negative $37 a barrel. So this is what happens when you have large capital investment, long lead times, not a lot of growth, and you get a shock. Prices went negative. I can assure you that Crown Castle has never paid someone a substantial amount of money to take space on a tower. They don't have to do that. If that happens, you would just say no. It didn't work that way in the energy space. You actually had negative prices. And so a big shock to the system. During the first part of 2020, I got there in time for the company's first ever quarterly loss. I was there for the second. Had like a $20 billion impairment at the end of the year. The company was burning through many tens of billions of dollars of cash at the time because the market had turned south. I say all of this not to give you guys some long lesson on the energy industry, but I think that today's environment in the tower space is one, which I'll talk about in a bit, where there are certainly some headwinds. You do have this nice backdrop of long-term demand growth in mobile data, but there are also some headwinds too. But I think coming in from a little different space, I probably see those headwinds a little bit differently than some people who have been in the industry for a while. So, on the tower side first, current events. I mentioned despite that incredible growth in data demand, which does a lot of good things, we still have some headwinds like high interest rates for starters. In the infrastructure space in particular, you tend to have assets that have relatively low risk levels, at least in the context of the broader capital markets, which means a lower expected return is required, so interest rates go up a bit. Cost of capital is pretty important, and some investment opportunities can be pretty sensitive to that. So something that would have cleared your cost of capital, a couple years ago when interest rates were much, much lower, now may cause certain opportunities to fall out of the viable solution set. You also see these three boxes after that: limited subscriber growth, limited ARPU growth, and lack of 5G monetization. They all kind of go hand in hand. Data growth is great. Data growth that leads to new sources of revenue is better. So it's great to have the tailwind of effectively a product at the end of the value chain that consumers want more and more and more and more of. But it's certainly much better when they pay you for it. And then all of this kind of led to slowing 5G deployments. Now, I know when I arrived in June at Crown Castle, I looked back before I came. I probably looked back 6 or 7 years, and the company had never taken down its guidance that it provides to the street at any point in time. And I was about 3 weeks in, and I was like, well, hey, we have to take down guide. So it's like, okay, well, that was some good timing on my part. But when I started looking at it, the thing that was amazing was even though that we've seen this pretty substantial slowdown in tower activity that started to occur in the back part of the second quarter in 2023, and it did impact the business, we took our guidance down. It was $40 million AFFO. And AFFO, which was $3.3 billion, we took the guide down, and it's still rounded to $3.3 billion. So, in the context of what I had come from, where it was going from making, say, $10 billion a quarter to losing a similar amount in a quarter, this felt like a relatively containable problem. And it also is interesting because from my standpoint, when I look at from an industry perspective, it's still, when we see these downturns, one, opportunities are always created in these downturns. It's very much the case in the other spaces I've played in, and I think it's true in this one as well. But also from Crown's perspective, look, it doesn't take the big strategic levers away. Yes, it's not fun to go through these things, but it wasn't a situation where you're worried about liquidity or you're worried about something more substantial. So I think it's sort of good to keep that in mind. And then on the tailwind side, I talked about the increasing data demand, and this is one where the lack of 5G monetization, one of the complaints about 5G is there hasn't been a killer app or a new use case. I would say that fixed wireless is sort of the closest thing to that, but there really hasn't been anything that has taken off to move the needle above and beyond what people would probably expect. But we're still seeing big increases in data demand, which is pretty cool. And I think a lot of times people don't, as consumers, think about using more data, but they still do. And a precursor to all of this is making sure that the network has capacity to give people what they want. There are elements of, and I think about just someone scrolling through, Instagram on their phone. I have a couple of kids. I have a daughter who starts to like to look at this stuff, and she'll just scroll and scroll and scroll, but she gets really bored if she gets the little spinny wheel. So if we go somewhere where, you still have 4 bars, you're close to a tower, but the data is all being consumed, she's going to put it down. And she won't come back to it for a while. And so she ends up using substantially less data than she would otherwise. If she doesn't get the spinning wheel, she keeps scrolling. And it's also, I think most people don't think much about it, but even if you're just going to use, say, you're going to look at Instagram for 5 minutes, the user experience from most people's standpoint is, well, I looked at Instagram for 5 minutes. It's a form of entertainment, using the same thing. But if you can download the pictures faster, you see more content, and you end up using more data. And there are a lot of other things, of course. It's sort of a silly example, but things that have increased data demand over time in a way that probably doesn't feel, really obvious when you think about it. Network congestion is a tailwind. So certainly, as just the overall amount of data consumed goes up by 20+% year after year after year, it puts a lot of strain on the network. And in terms of nominal data consumed, if you look at the difference between, on a U.S. context, 21 and 22, the incremental amount of data consumed over that year was more than the whole, the U.S. consumed as a whole in, I think, 2017 is as far back as you would have to go, so not far. So it doesn't take long when data demand is growing so quickly on a nominal basis to end up causing network congestion. And at the end of the day, carriers still compete on network quality. And I can say, as someone who travels a bit, I was just in the Caribbean and went back to 3G for a little while. It's annoying. And if the network doesn't work, at some point, people will get frustrated and look for something else. I think, as I'll talk about a little bit later, as we look at the opportunity set going forward, particularly in the long term, having network congestion at the end of the day prevents a lot of the cool advancements that everybody benefits from in the long term. And so without the work that we do and without the critical infrastructure, there are so many things that a lot of people, we don't have line of sight to yet that will not develop as quickly. Some other tailwinds. I'll talk a little bit about this later. So autonomous machines, cars, AI, machine learning. There are a lot of things on the horizon that, when I look at this, and this is just me personally, I don't see these driving a lot of data demand from where we sit today. But I see them driving a lot of demand tomorrow. I think we're still sort of on the earlier stages of the hype cycle for these things, and that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad place to be. I think that there are a lot of uses for these things that are going to come into play that need a fast network in order to actually take full advantage of them and promote advancements there. But at the end of the day, they're certainly creating some tailwind, and as you go out into the medium term, I think that it looks really promising. And then the last piece here, more data devices and platforms. Obviously that's going to help and all lead to additional investment being required. And I think the nice thing from an industry standpoint, I'm going to go back to this slide. When you have an end product, this product sits at the end of the value chain, people want it. you can't underinvest for very long in a situation like this because the demand growth still comes. And so, yes, I could probably argue that people might change their behavior to some extent if network quality goes down. If it's ubiquitous, all networks degrade. Yeah, maybe there is less data consumption, but in general, people are going to want more. They're going to want faster. They want lower latency. And they like less cost too. But this data is being demanded. And so if you go too long underinvesting, it gets really hard to catch up. Same is true in other industries as well. But when you have a line with a slope like that, it gets to be really tricky. So you can't go too long before you invest. So if we move on from, I was talking about kind of the tower context. I'm also going to bring small cells into play for just a second. This is just kind of a simple diagram that I wanted to show. And so if you look at this on the left, you have wireless congestion. You have one tower sitting over there. We have a lot of people, and they are now consuming so much data in this space that the tower cannot serve all of them. So you have some angry folks there in red with a little spinny bar over their heads. As the data usage increases, all that extra demand starts to overload capacity. So as we go to the right, we've got another macro tower that comes on the right. Obviously, with the ways to increase network capacity here, one being adding spectrum, the next cell splitting, and then also, we'll get some efficiency gains over time, but we've added another macro tower. It's the most cost-effective way to add capacity to this network. But ultimately, over time, more and more data is consumed as that growth continues to increase. And at some point, you need additional infrastructure to add capacity, and that's where the small cells come in, and we've got one down there in the middle of the picture. So in a place where it is either impossible to build a tower because there's not enough space, you're not able to for permitting regulatory reasons, we've got a small cell, and it's interesting because we've actually seen a couple of places where the small cell acceleration plays out in real time. And it doesn't happen overnight, but it's been sort of interesting to see. In the places where population is densest, we have a couple of walking tours that we like to do with investors when they come into town. So I'm based out of Houston. We take them to downtown Houston to a place called Discovery Green. And several years ago, there was a Super Bowl. So initially, there was a build out at a convention center that was hosting some events associated with the Super Bowl, but it was just a handful of small cells. Over time, each year goes by, and a few more are added, and a few more are added, and eventually there was a small outdoor concert venue that was put in the same location. And so in order to manage peak loads, more and more capacity was added. And it didn't seem like a lot was going up at the time, but you fast forward to today, and the last time I was down there, there were right at, I believe, 50 small cell nodes on about 1.5 miles of fiber in this area. And so it wasn't something that just popped up all of a sudden, but looking back over, an 8 to 10 year period, really significant growth. Not every place is going to be like that. Obviously, this is a place where there's really, really acute dense data demand at certain points in time. But it's neat to see, looking back over a period of time, how that infrastructure developed and how, small cells as well are part of the solution set. All right. So we've talked a little bit, and I think Patrick was mentioning some of this. If you look back, I'd kind of mentioned that we're in a bit of a slowdown in 5G. So after the period from 2020 to 2022, when a record amount of spectrum was issued and acquired, both in dollar terms and in amount, we had a huge surge in activity on the tower side. They were great years for Crown Castle. I think they were great years for the industry. Really, really, really heavy growth, 2020 through 2022. In 2023, started to see a slowdown. I know we started to see it kind of, back half of the second quarter in 2023. But I think it's good to put this in context, because if you look at the 4G cycle, average spend was about $30 billion. So just to orient everyone, I know it's a little hard to see. The light blue is going to be wireless CapEx. The dark blue is what was spent on spectrum acquisition. The gray is going to be U.S. mobile demand. And then the blue line on top is just cumulative wireless investment in the U.S. So light blue is going to be wireless CapEx. You can see in the dark blue all the spectrum that was acquired. But the wireless CapEx bars have been going up over time. And 5G, despite all the things that I was talking about with, not being a killer app, not being a clear brand new use case, park fixed wireless for a second, you still see a lot more money being spent, certainly on the front end of 5G, to deploy all that spectrum that was acquired. And even in 2023, as you saw some activity trail off, wireless CapEx was still at $35 billion, so higher than any point that you would have seen during the 4G cycle. This all supported a huge increase in nominal data demand. That gray line keeps going up and up and up. That bar gets bigger and bigger. But the amount spent doesn't go up nearly as fast, but it's still going up. Part of the reason that it's not going up faster is the shared infrastructure model. So part of how this works is over time, data has become much, much, much less expensive on a per byte basis, largely due to advancements and efficiencies that the people in this room find. But with even all of that, it's hard for me to look at this chart and think of 5G as a total bust. Data demand continues to go up. Spin continues to go up versus 4G. And in the grand scheme of things, over a longer period of time, and certainly as I look out through 2027, from Crown Castle's standpoint, we expect tower growth to be 5% per year is what we've said, which is in line or in excess of what you would have seen during kind of the long tail of activity in 4G after the initial surge in deployment. So I think this chart is kind of good context and also heartening from the standpoint that, again, to meet that data demand, you really need a long period of time with pretty steady investment even after the initial surge in activity. And while you can go through periods where there is less activity for short periods of time, it doesn't take long with a gray bar like that or gray line before incremental investment is needed to add much needed capacity to networks. I think before I turn to the next part, and I'll talk a little bit about the future, the other thing that's important about this is without this, there are so many things that never would have come to be. I mean, I was talking about at the beginning how I used to use that plastic calling card at a payphone, and now I can connect with anyone anywhere in the world right now if I want to on this stage, and do a whole bunch of other stuff. Like 60 seconds, I could buy an airline ticket and probably get an Uber. Probably take the Uber a little longer to get here than 60 seconds, but I could order one certainly. It's just, there's so much more stuff that you can do. I also take care of tons of work items on my phone. I was standing back there and I was able to actually approve a wire that had to go out today, rather than faxing something in or needing to be in front of my computer. But all of these things that happened over the last 20 years wouldn't have been possible if the network hadn't been there first. And so I think the infrastructure has to be in place, and the speed has to be there and the dependability has to be there before the innovations follow. We really saw that, I think, through 2G, 3G, and 4G, and I don't see why 5G would necessarily be any different. And without making sure that the infrastructure is there to support a network that's needed, it's hard to imagine that we'll maximize the potential both of our industry and far beyond over the next 20 years. So I told you, we can do so much with our phones now. I like this guy. He has a lot of cool stuff. But he doesn't need any of it anymore because he can do all that on his phone. I think I probably owned a few of those things, actually, over the years. And I don't know that I ever dressed quite like that, but he looks, I don't know, he looks kind of cool. But I think it's kind of, it's good to think about where we've been and where we're going. And so when we think about emerging trends, digitization and virtualization, look, I'll just hit on each of these very, very briefly and then move on to a few closing thoughts. And given the audience size, I'll leave a little bit of time for questions at the end. Emerging trends, so digitization, look, there's just a lot more data to compute. exponential and evolving data demand. We've talked about that a lot, and that at the end of the day, you have to have an end use, a product at the end of the value chain that people are willing to pay for and demand more of over time. Autonomous AI and machine learning. So this is one where I think, I mentioned I don't think that if we look at 2024, that this is going to be necessarily a big driver of data demand. But I think as we look out over the next few years, it's hard for me to say exactly what will come out of it, but I think something will almost certainly come out of it. I would be really bad at picking the exact winner, but there are a lot of things on the horizon that look promising and will certainly require a lot of data. Densification, distribution, decentralization, so edge, things like that. Separation of asset ownership and service delivery. One of the things that I also have found interesting coming into this space is, there are all these things that have to happen to make the network work. But I do think that, at least from my standpoint, a lot of time is spent thinking about where are the specific areas where my company can add unique value? What are our sources of competitive advantage? What are the core capabilities that we have? And where can we add, truly unique value? And what does that look like going forward? And then the last one, sustainability, security, and privacy. I think privacy will be a must. Security, sustainability as well. As computing power goes up, the amount of energy that it takes goes up, and so sustainability is also something that certainly, as you look out over time, could become a much bigger consideration than it already is. But like I said, I don't know when things are going to change. I think it's hard to tell exactly what path the future is going to take. I know that if the network is not there and the infrastructure is not there, we're not going to make a lot of progress. And the work that we all do here adds a lot of value to society. It helps society and people prosper in ways that, like I said, were unimaginable 20 years ago, and I think will be unimaginable if we are sitting here today. We won't be able to figure out exactly all the ways that we are going to improve things 20 years from now. But this is just a picture. I don't know how easy it is for folks to see. That things change slowly until they don't. People used horse-drawn buggies for a really long time. The picture on the left is actually Fifth Avenue. And the red circle is around the lone car on the street in a sea of buggies. And 10 years later, you have the same Fifth Avenue, 1913, and you have the red circle around the one car, or the one buggy in a sea of cars. So it's just kind of an interesting way to think about, for most of history, people who used, for a long time, people who used horses. Didn't take long before not only do you see a bunch of cars and no buggies, virtually, street looks a little different too, the infrastructure came into place, and all of a sudden, you look back and it's like, wow, the world's changed a lot. And I think this industry is very much the same. So with that, I think about all of the different opportunities and what may be most likely to come. Like I said, I don't know, but I certainly think that as you look out at other companies and other industries, the ability to do things more effectively and efficiently is something that people are always looking for and willing to pay a lot for. And I think the ability to automate and use things like drones is a huge source of potential demand for this industry. It's really easy for me to see, I grew up in a farming community, that if you look at agriculture as an example, being able to have real-time monitoring of nutrient levels, moisture levels, monitoring crop health, and constantly sending, both data, uploading and downloading on a regular basis, and then being able to automatically adjust a watering cycle or fertilizer needs at any time. Like, that's extremely valuable if you can pull it off. And I think the technology is sort of there to pull it off. Being able to deploy it at scale is something that will take a lot of continued investment in the infrastructure. And that's just one sector. I think smart factories, I think manufacturing processes, there are going to be so many opportunities for people to do things better and make more with the resources and the time that we have now. And this industry will be absolutely critical to doing that. All right. I thank you for humoring me. It is tough to get up here and do a 45-minute monologue, so I will open it up to questions if people are interested. I can also wander around. I don't know how far off the stage I can go, but happy to take some.
So, do you see an iPhone with AI capability as iPhone moment that we had with 3G? No, you cannot predict the future, but do you have any prediction about that? In terms as for the tailwind, as of the headwind, do you consider the consolidation that happened in the wireless carriers? I know that Comcast did not oppose it publicly. We used to have 7 carriers, now 3 carriers. Has it affected your business?
Yeah, so the last one first, certainly consolidation, all else equal, I think you could easily say would have had a negative impact. We certainly talked about the churn that we realized from that and still have a little bit of churn left to come in 2025. In general, in any industry, more competition among customers is better than not, too. In terms of the first part of that, I don't know, but it's easy for me to see all sorts of applications that can potentially, move the needle. And I think about, I was joking around about my calling card, but like maps are the same way. Like I think about, I don't know, what was it, 20 years ago? I used to have like a road atlas that I actually had to keep in my car. And you actually had to look at like a paper map if you wanted to go places, and I'm horrible with directions. So I don't know that I would have continued to survive and, long into adulthood without the advent of Google Maps. But yeah, you used to have to use a paper map. And then this great thing came along, MapQuest, and I would sit at my computer and I could print out the directions, and it was awesome until I took a wrong turn and then didn't update. And so, but that was a leap forward. It was really nice to be able to take that, and it would tell me exactly where to go. And now I can actually like look at Google Maps, and it brings up the route, and it adjusts automatically. But like going forward, what could I see? I mean, why couldn't you have your phone connected to some lenses that then actually show you the path to where you want to go and what you can buy? I know maybe I would like to order a coffee. I'm going to walk by Starbucks on this route that it's taking me on. I just follow the little green arrow, take my little diversion into the coffee shop and pick up a cup and then go on my way. I think that there's a lot of room for these things, like something small like that, to continue to advance and develop in ways that are both cool, but actually, help make people more efficient. And so I don't know what it'll be, but I think that there will certainly be something.
Kris, I'm Sharp Smith with Inside Towers. Google Maps, turn-by-turn instructions, best thing that ever happened to my marriage. All I can say. I was wondering if you could comment on your view of diversification in the industry, and we've heard a lot over the years, mostly from Mark Gansey, about diversification, getting into a number of different areas in the industry, and I was wondering if the model of having fiber and small cells and macro towers, if you still think that that's a way that companies will go, or is it or is it evolving from your standpoint?
Yeah, that's a good question. I always think about it in terms of value. And so, it depends on the pieces that you're talking about. We can use the example you gave with tower, fiber, and small cells. There are certain combinations of those businesses that are going to make a little bit more sense together because there are operational synergies or elements in the value chain that actually have some benefits to being, located next to each other. There are also always some costs to keeping things together too. Sometimes they're hard to quantify, but having specific focus on one business and being able to design all of your training and systems and staff and everything to one specific application can also have some benefits. It's just trying to figure out what in the mass balance the synergies and dyssynergies are from having things like this together. In terms of benefits from diversification for the sake of diversification, so let's say I were just purely a passive asset owner. As an individual investor, I love diversification because I actually get a higher expected return for a lower level of volatility. As a corporation or as a company, I don't think that it actually adds a lot of value if you're not looking at sort of the operational piece. Investors can diversify on their own. If I'm not adding or subtracting anything to it, you know, maybe I have a little less volatility. As a company, maybe I reduce the odds of particularly bad outcomes with some diversifications. But in terms of creating a lot of value, I don't think it does it unless you start looking at what do I actually gain something by having those things close together. In the context of small cells and fiber, you know, I think that there are maybe some better natural fits with those and sort of more potential synergies than there might be with, say, the tower versus small cell and fiber context. But there are puts and takes on both sides of those equations.
I know. Has Crown Castle offered any guidance as to what you may do in the future in terms of your asset allocation in that area? And I know I'm not asking you to divulge anything that you haven't already spoken about in a quarterly report.
Yeah, no, that's okay. And so there really isn't. You know, we're in the process of a strategic review of our fiber segment now. That's ongoing, and there really aren't any updates that I have to provide on it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Really enjoyed your talk today. Hello, my name is Aaron. Moving from Exxon over to Crown King, I know there's a lot that you need to get up to speed with. Moving from one industry to the next, granted at your position, I know that the mindset still shifts over there and the observation continues to be the same. What were things that you noticed coming into this industry from an out-of-the-box position and perspective? What did you see as weaknesses, and where did you see strengths, and what are things that we're not focusing on right now in our industry that you see being an outside spectator now participating and being a part of it?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. I appreciate it. That's a great question. I love looking at things through my outsider lens a bit, primarily because that's sort of all I have, so that's all I can do at this point, although I've learned a lot over the last 9 months as well. You know, from a Crown standpoint, I think the biggest thing that I've kind of found is, well, there are a couple of things. One, maybe I'll start with the industry context. I talked a lot about the stability of the wireless industry because it is very stable. I mean, I know that there are puts and takes, but compared to the volatility that I experienced, particularly in the energy space, the predictable growth provides this nice sort of baseline level of activity that you can pretty much, one, count on, because over time you'll fall behind very quickly if you're not investing sufficiently in a network, which provides a lot of benefits. We had the diversification question earlier. In the energy space, ExxonMobil is a diversified energy company. It has upstream, downstream, and chemicals. Helps them ride waves of volatility, ones that in this industry, I think, make that sort of less necessary. Those tailwinds from demand are actually incredibly helpful. The other thing that I've noticed, though, is that people often think about the industry in the context of towers. And I think as other things come into play, and I know there are people from companies that do all sorts of things here in the value chain, also in fiber and small cells, the assets and the risks associated with different types of assets are different. So the returns that you would expect from different assets are going to be different, and it's important when you're going in, particularly on the leading edge of certain things, to think about and do your best to quantify what all of those puts and takes look like, and think of it in the context of what is it that we're both trying to accomplish, and what are the specific things about that market and that value chain that may look a little bit different than what we're generally used to. And I think any time that you look at going into something new, whether it's we talk about something like data centers or many of the things that are probably going to be necessary to provide some of the advancements that we'll see going forward, it's just good not to let the past sort of guide how you view something that's brand new and may or may not be completely different. Yes.
I appreciate you sharing that substantial investment requirement. And I just wanted to ask, can you share, if you can, what Crown's commitment is to that investment and where?
Sure. So if you look at what Crown spends, I can tell you a couple of things. We released a guide for 2024 after it was on our third quarter earnings call. We reiterated it last quarter. If you look at the places where most of the spend comes from our side, it's going to be in our fiber segment, which is predominantly going to be small cells, and we have net capex guide of between $1 and $1.1 billion for 2024. On the tower side, there's much less spend, certainly on a net basis, somewhere a little bit less than $100 million. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate the time and the questions. Look forward to getting to meet folks later. And if anybody wants to catch up later, I'll be outside for a bit. But thank you.